Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about this guy here, the Sony A7R4, and here is a look at what it can do. Alright, so first of all, I want to say that this is not a review. I am not a review channel. I have no interest in reviewing camera gear and things like that. My sole purpose for making this video, my sole purpose for this channel is to talk about the things that I have, to talk about the tools that I use to be able to create the type of work that I do. And so, with that being said, let's get into it. And so what this video is going to be is less about specs, less about all of the things that makes this camera the camera that it is. If you want to see a video that talks mainly about specs, Polin did an amazing real world review, and so if you want to check that video out, I'll link that video down in the description. So what I'm going to do is I am going to talk very shortly about my favorite parts of this camera, and then I'm going to talk about the couple things that I don't like about this camera, and then I'm also going to talk about some things that I don't care, that other reviewers may have said about this camera that I just don't care about because it really doesn't affect me. So the first thing I want to talk about is the new design. I have been using the A7 Mark III for the last year and a half as my main workhorse. I have been using for photography and also for videography, and there are some things that I don't like about it, mainly the small grip, as I have very large hands. If you guys have never met me, I am 6'4" and a half, a basketball player. I can easily palm a basketball, and so that just lets you know how big my hands are. And the grip on the A7 III left a little bit to be desired. Is it the worst grip in the world? No, I've owned the A7I, I've owned the A7 II, so Sony has done a good job of redesigning their cameras, you know, iteration after iteration, and so I appreciate that. But as I said, the first thing that you're gonna notice about this camera when you hold it is the bigger grip. That is right off the bat. Right off the rip, you're gonna appreciate this bigger grip. The second thing that you're gonna love about it is all of the redesigned buttons. The joystick on the back of this camera has been redesigned. It's a little bigger. It's got what Polin likes to call knipples, but technically what it is just a bigger joystick with raised kind of like grippy buttons on it, which makes it easier to move around when you're shooting and things like that. The third thing that you're going to notice about the redesign is all of the redesigned port doors. One of the things that drives me crazy about this A7 III, and I'm sure everyone else who has ever used it to shoot video ever, is that the doors dangle down, and those dangling doors are literally noisemakers when you are trying to record some video. More importantly, when they're dangling all over the place, I have a small rig cage on my A7 III, and basically when they're dangling all over the place, the doors get in the way of other things like your mic jack and your mini HDMI output, and so those doors are just really kind of a nuisance. And then the fourth thing that you are going to notice about the redesign is that, and this is really little, it's not a huge deal, at least to me, but they reorganized the memory card slots. And so memory card slot 1 is at the top, memory card slot is at the bottom, as it should be. One thing that I would also like for them to change in future iterations of this camera or other cameras is that the memory card goes in, but it faces away from you. And so Little thing, but not that big a deal. The second thing that I love about this camera is the updated autofocus system. Now, if you know anything about Sony cameras, or maybe you don't, Sony's autofocus system has been top notch for the last couple years. Some might say, I know Gerald Undone would say this, but Sony has the best autofocusing system out of any cameras on the market. It's only gotten better in the A7 Mark IV. The eye autofocusing system is amazing. It locks onto the eye, and basically it's a cheat code. So the thing that they've done to make it even better is they've put in this lock-on tracking, where basically you can touch the screen in the back of the camera to lock onto a subject, and no matter where that subject goes in the frame, that focus stays locked on that person. People can walk in front of people, you can turn backwards. If you're sharing the scene with someone else, that lock-on focus is gonna stay sticky on the person that you touched on the back of that screen. That's amazing. The thing that makes it even better is that all of these focus modes, the eye autofocus, the lock-on tracking, it works in video. And so that has been a complete game changer, because I'll admit, when making videos, I am not the best at manual focusing and pulling and racking focus and things like that. If I know that I can count on the autofocusing system in this camera, then that is half the battle. I can focus on other things like composition and getting the shot and making sure that what I'm trying to get, the shot that I'm trying to get, I'm getting. The less things that you have to think about when you're creating, the better. And if I don't have to think about autofocusing, why should I? And then one other thing, and to some people it's a huge change. To me, it's a huge change. Maybe might be a little change to other people, but in the A7 Mark III, and I think most cameras before it, when you move your cursor on your focus points, before it was gray, and so sometimes that cursor would get lost in the frame because you couldn't see it because it was gray. The A7 IV, they've changed it where you can have the ability now to make that cursor either white or red. I've changed mine to red. I'm not losing my cursor anymore. That is the new redesigned autofocusing system on this camera. Again, I believe best in class, and I think there might be other people who would agree with me with that also. The third thing that I love about this camera, I should have said this first. I should have said this in the beginning, but firstly, I'm a photographer first and foremost. That is the main purpose for me buying this camera. And so 61 megapixels, that was the deciding factor for me when I wanted to update my camera. I used to take all of my stills in this A7 III, which is a 24 megapixel camera. And what I found was that the more I edited files, the easier it was for them to just kind of break apart. And as I became a more experienced photographer, and as I became better at editing my photos breaking down and breaking apart just became increasingly frustrating. And so to be able to have a file that's 61 megapixels raw and uncompressed, the size of that file, I think it's something like 128 megabits. All of that data you're gonna be able to use, all of that raw data you're gonna be able to use when it comes to your editing, when it comes to, cropping in and trying to recrop photos to find your composition. And with those 61 megapixels, what Sony allows is for you to, there's a crop mode that allows you to crop in, I think at like 1.6 or 1.7 or something like that. But basically you can shoot this camera in crop mode. And when you're doing that, because it already has the 61 megapixels, even those crop mode files are something around 26 megapixels, which is still more than this camera. To be able to get full frame 61 megapixels and crop frame 26 megapixels, that was really important to me, as I might need, extra distance or whatever it may happen, whatever it may be, that number of megapixels to me was really important. And then as I touched on earlier, Another thing about that is I really do enjoy the file size that you get with this camera. There are a lot of downsides to that, as I'll get into later, but just to be able to have a picture that you can work with, you know, uncompressed raw, the amount of data that you have to work with in the beginning, it's like a kid in a candy factory, you know what I mean? To be able to edit a photo fully without it falling apart was really important to me. So there are two main things that I wouldn't say that I don't like about the camera, but if I have to nitpick this camera and if there were some things that I would change, these are those two things. So the first thing that I would change is that when I have this camera on a tripod and I am taking landscape photos and I turn it into portrait mode, I can't articulate the screen at all. And so, like I said before, I'm 6'4". Most tripods don't go high enough for me to just be able to see the screen when I am setting up shots and composing my shots. And so if this screen articulated a little bit, if I was able to, you know, turn it out and just be able to look down at it like I do when I am in landscape mode, right? I can just pop that screen out like that and I can just look down at the screen this way. But I can't do that. The screen is basically useless in portrait mode. So that's the first thing that I would change if I had to change something, if I could change something about this, just to be able to articulate the screen while in portrait mode when I am shooting landscapes. The second thing that is not something that I dislike about the camera, but the file sizes are a real problem when it comes to Lightroom. Lightroom does not like these huge, raw, uncompressed files. It struggles, it bogs down the program, and it doesn't seem to matter if you have, it doesn't seem to be a software or hardware limitation of my computer. It is absolutely a software limitation within Lightroom to be able to handle these huge file sizes. And so you just find a way to work around that. So that's the only kind of other thing that is annoying about this. The write speeds when you are making photos, if you fill up the buffer, you will have to wait, you know, 7 seconds instead of 5 seconds for the buffer to clear, but I'm not a sports photographer, so I'm not out shooting, you know, long bursts, or I'm not missing shots because I'm waiting on the buffer to clear. And so the last couple things that I want to get into are some things that I've heard about this camera that I've heard other people gripe about, because I think that they don't really understand how Sony has set up their cameras to work, or their camera line to work. So the first one that I hear about a lot is that this camera doesn't have 4K 60, or that this camera doesn't have 4K 120, and it doesn't have a 10-bit 422 codec, and all of that kind of stuff. This is an A7R, and basically what Sony aims this camera towards is the photographers, right? This camera is designed to be Sony's high resolution camera. And so the video capabilities that this camera has, first of all, are top notch. You still get 4K up to 30 frames per second. You still get 120 frames per second in full HD at 1080, as you saw in the video that I posted at the beginning of this video. So all of those things are still here in this camera. Would it be nice to have 10-bit 422? Yeah, maybe, but I don't really use this camera as my hybrid shooting camera. I don't need this camera to do those things. Sorry about the noise. I'm in my basement and there are people who live above me, so whatever. I'm sorry, there's not people who live above me. There are people walking around, and so whatever. Anyway. And so those video features, to me specifically, aren't important for this camera. This is the camera that I use to shoot now about 90% of my stills, and so none of those things kind of matter. The second thing that I hear people gripe about all the time about this camera, and Sony's in general, is the menu system. Listen, I understand that the menu system is long and there's a lot, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, But I think if you sit down and you go through the menu system and you set up all of your shortcuts in your function screen, and you set up all of your custom buttons, you never have to go into the menu system again, because of the customization of this camera allows you to stay out of it. And then the third thing that people gripe about all the time, and I personally don't understand it, is that this touchscreen isn't fully touch capable. So every time I pick up my phone, the first thing I'm doing is wiping down the screen because I touch it so much. There's fingerprints all over the place. I use this screen to set up shots all the time. The last thing I want is to be wiping fingerprints off every single time I pick it up. This screen, lacking 100% touch functions, is actually a bonus for me because I would touch it all the time and I would absolutely accidentally bump it, and things would get touched and settings would get changed. And so to me, that is another thing that doesn't matter. Some other things real quick. The exposure compensation button has a little clicky thing that locks it so that you can't accidentally bump it. I like that one. If you press it, you can move it. If you press it again, it locks it. I wish they had put the same button that they put on the exposure compensation on the mode dial, because on the mode dial, there's a button that locks it all the time, and you have to actually press and change the mode dial at the same time to be able to change the mode dial. I wish that they put the clicky one on top of it, just to make it easier to manipulate with one hand. And then that's it. I have been having a ton of fun shooting with this camera. This camera is everything that I think I will need and or want in a camera for the next 3 or 4 years until it breaks. And so I have been 100% happy with this camera. I can't really think of anything that I can say right now that limits me as a stills photographer with this camera. So that is it. That has been my experience with using this camera. Again, if you are looking for someone who's gonna go in depth in specs, you can check out Jared Polin's real world review. And if you need someone to sit down and go through the menu system and explain all of the things and even show you how he set up his camera, Jared also did a menu deep dive on the A7 III, and a lot of those things transferred over to this camera. And so if you're looking for a deep dive into the menu, I will link both of those videos down below. If there are any other questions that you guys have about this camera, some questions that you guys want answered about this camera, also leave those questions down below. Also, tell me what you guys are shooting with. I have some thoughts about the A7 III, but I don't have it in my hand. I don't want to be A7S III. I don't have that camera in my hand. I haven't used it, and I don't want to be one of those people who kind of make statements about something that I haven't used before. And so I'll leave that for another video. Hopefully I can get my hands on that in the future. But that has been it. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please think about doing so. Hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Any questions that you guys have, leave those down in the comments. I appreciate you being here. Again, I am Jamil. This has been A Boy Named Jamil. Follow me on Instagram if you want to see some of my photos, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.